In the early hours of a morning that most of the world was still asleep for, Israeli warplanes crossed into the airspace of not one, not two, but at least 3 different countries simultaneously, striking targets that had been carefully identified, mapped, and prepared for months in advance. By the time the sun rose over the Middle East, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had lost 16 of its own aircraft in Tehran alone, while senior Hezbollah commanders lay dead in the rubble of Beirut's southern suburbs, and Iranian intelligence officers were being pulled from the wreckage of a building in Damascus that no longer existed. This is the story of Israel's overnight multi-front assault, why it represents exactly the kind of war Tehran has spent years desperately trying to avoid, and why the carefully coordinated nature of these strikes reveals something about Israel's strategic intentions that officials in Jerusalem have not yet said directly out loud. Let's set the stage first, because to understand why these overnight strikes carry so much weight, you need to understand just how deliberately Israel has been preparing for exactly this kind of coordinated, multi-front operation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had already told his own cabinet, just days before these strikes took place, that Israel was already in what he described as a multi-front war with Iran and its proxies across the region. That wasn't political rhetoric designed to rally domestic support. That was an operational acknowledgement from the country's highest political authority that Israel's military had already moved beyond the shadow war phase and into something considerably more direct and considerably more dangerous. According to detailed reporting from multiple outlets, the overnight strikes that followed that declaration targeted Iranian military infrastructure and proxy assets across at least 4 distinct theaters simultaneously: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and the Iranian heartland itself, in what analysts have openly described as the most significant Israeli military operation since the opening strikes of the war back in February. In Lebanon, Israeli warplanes struck Beirut's southern suburbs, specifically targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in the Dahieh district, after issuing evacuation warnings to civilians in the area. The strikes followed a pattern that Israeli forces had been refining for months, hitting command and control nodes, weapon storage facilities, and the residences of senior Hezbollah military figures, all within a concentrated geographic area that Hezbollah has long used as its primary operational hub. In Syria, the strikes were even more precise and even more deadly. An Israeli airstrike targeting the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Syria spy chief in Damascus killed 12 people, according to a War Monitor's updated toll. 5 of those killed were Iranians, including 3 IRGC leaders. 4 were Syrians working with the Iranians. 2 were Lebanese, and 1 was an Iraqi national. The building targeted belonged to the IRGC itself, located in the Mazeh neighborhood, a high-security zone known to be home to leaders of the IRGC and pro-Iran Palestinian factions, as well as a United Nations headquarters and multiple embassies. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed it lost 5 members in the strike, including the IRGC's Syria intelligence chief and his deputy, both of whom were described as having been martyred in the attack on Syria by Israel. This was not a strike on a peripheral target or a symbolic gesture. This was the systematic decapitation of Iran's intelligence apparatus inside one of its most important regional allies. In Damascus, the toll was devastatingly specific and almost impossible to process in a single reading. The IRGC's Syria intelligence chief, Haj Sadiq Omidzadeh, the man responsible for coordinating all Iranian proxy operations across the Levant, was killed. His deputy, Haj Gholam Moharram, the officer who handled the logistical pipeline connecting Tehran to Hezbollah's front lines, was killed. 3 additional IRGC commanders, Hojatollah Omidvar, Ali Agazadeh, and Hossein Mohammadi, each overseeing separate operational sectors inside Syrian territory, were killed. A 4th IRGC officer, Saeed Karimi, was also killed in the same strike. 4 Syrian operatives who had spent years facilitating the Iranian intelligence network inside their own country were killed. 2 Lebanese Hezbollah liaison officers who had been embedded with the IRGC since the war began were killed. And 1 Iraqi Quds Force operative who had been facilitating the transfer of drone technology from Iran to Iraqi militias was killed. 12 individuals in total pulled from the rubble of a single building in the Mazeh neighborhood of Damascus, a building that Israeli intelligence had mapped, tracked, and designated for elimination months before these strikes ever took place. And then there was Iraq, a theater that has received considerably less international attention than Lebanon or Syria, but that may actually be the most strategically significant front in this entire overnight campaign. According to multiple reports, Israeli strikes in Iraq specifically targeted Iranian Quds Force operatives and allied militias that had been preparing what Israeli intelligence described as a large-scale attack of multiple killer drones on Israel. The Iraqi government, already struggling to maintain any semblance of control over the various Iranian-aligned militias operating within its borders, found itself pulled even deeper into a conflict it has spent months desperately trying to avoid being dragged into. The strikes in Baghdad reportedly drew Iraq deeper into the Middle East war that has already sparked economic turmoil across the globe. And in the Iranian heartland itself, the scale of the Israeli operation becomes genuinely staggering. The Israeli military claimed that its air force destroyed 16 aircraft belonging to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds force during overnight attacks in Tehran. 16 aircraft destroyed in a single night, not on a battlefield, not in contested airspace, but on the ground, inside Iran's own capital city. That kind of operation requires not just military capability, but intelligence penetration at a level that suggests Israel has assets inside Iran's military establishment that Tehran cannot identify or neutralize. The strikes also reportedly targeted Iranian intelligence minister Khatib directly, alongside senior Hamas commanders operating inside Iranian territory. These were not random targets chosen from a list of military installations. These were specific individuals, specific aircraft, specific capabilities that Israel had identified, tracked, and decided to eliminate in a single coordinated operation that spanned the entire region. Now, why does an operation like this matter, so much beyond the immediate destruction it caused? Let's sit with that question for a second, because the answer is genuinely unsettling, not just for Tehran's military planners, but for the regime's entire internal security apparatus. Consider what this overnight assault actually required to execute successfully. Striking targets in 4 different countries simultaneously in a single night, without any of those strikes being intercepted, without any of those targets being evacuated beforehand, and without any significant Israeli losses in return. That is not just military capability. That is intelligence penetration at a level that should terrify every single Iranian commander still alive. How did Israeli intelligence know exactly which building in the Mazeh neighborhood contained the IRGC's Syria intelligence chief? How did they know his deputy would be present at that exact time? How did they identify and track the other IRGC commanders who were killed in that same strike? These were not random targets. These were specific individuals with specific schedules, inside a specific high-security neighborhood in Damascus that is supposed to be one of the most heavily protected zones in the entire Middle East. And then there is Tehran itself. 16 IRGC aircraft destroyed inside Iran's own capital city, on the ground, at their own military airfields. That is not a strike that happens without deeply placed human assets inside Iran's military establishment, assets that can identify which aircraft to target, where they are parked, and when they are most vulnerable. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the organization that spent decades building the most elaborate internal security network in the region, has now been penetrated so thoroughly that Israel can destroy its aircraft in its own capital city. On the same night, it kills its intelligence chief in Damascus, its Hezbollah commanders in Beirut, and its Quds force operatives in Baghdad, all in a single coordinated operation that Israel's military planners had clearly been rehearsing for months, if not years. Now, consider how this actually plays out inside an organization already gripped by the kind of deep institutional paranoia that had been building inside Iran's security establishment in the weeks and months following the devastating losses of the war itself. According to detailed reporting on internal fractures within the regime, IRGC intelligence branches had reportedly intensified internal surveillance following the security breaches that allowed so many senior commanders to be killed during the opening strikes. Back in February, with officers increasingly fearful that even minor complaints could trigger accusations of espionage or foreign collaboration. Against that backdrop of heightened internal paranoia, a coordinated multi-front Israeli strike killing senior commanders across 4 countries simultaneously, with Iran's own intelligence apparatus apparently unable to detect, disrupt, or even anticipate the operation. Doesn't exactly help calm nerves inside an organization already primed to suspect infiltration, sabotage, and hidden vulnerabilities lurking just beneath the surface. Think about how this kind of operation actually plays out inside an organization already gripped by that level of internal suspicion. Was Israeli intelligence simply that good, with deep penetration assets that Tehran cannot identify or neutralize? Or does a strike of this precision, killing this many senior commanders simultaneously across multiple countries, raise uncomfortable questions inside Iran's own security apparatus about whether something else might have been at play? Whether there are Iranian commanders actively collaborating with Israeli intelligence, whether the regime's internal communications have been comprehensively compromised, or whether the IRGC itself has been infiltrated at a level that Tehran's leadership simply cannot admit publicly without triggering a full-blown internal crisis? Given the extraordinary scale of this overnight operation, and given everything else Iran's security establishment had already been through in the preceding months, it is genuinely understandable why this specific assault would generate exactly the kind of unease that ripples well beyond just the immediate destruction itself. And here is where the pattern becomes genuinely impossible to dismiss as just another round of military escalation in an already escalated conflict. According to separate reporting on internal purges and suspicious deaths inside the regime, Iranian officials themselves have been unable to fully explain a growing number of significant losses within their own ranks. From the Zanjan explosion that killed 14 of their most experienced bomb disposal specialists, to the mysterious deaths of senior IRGC figures whose causes of death Iranian state media conspicuously refuse to explain. When you place this overnight multi-front Israeli strike alongside those other unexplained incidents, a broader pattern starts to emerge. One of an organization that keeps experiencing significant, sometimes devastating losses that its own officials either can't or won't fully explain to the public. Whether this operation was purely a demonstration of superior Israeli intelligence and military capability, or whether it's symptomatic of something deeper and more troubling happening inside Iran's own security establishment, infiltration, internal sabotage, or simple institutional breakdown from months of sustained pressure and losses, remains something that no outside observer can determine with complete confidence right now. But the pattern itself, an organization repeatedly unable to detect, prevent, or even fully explain significant losses within its own ranks, tells you something important about the state of internal cohesion and confidence inside Iran's security apparatus right now. Now let's talk about the Israeli political context that sits underneath all of this military activity, because the timing of these strikes is just as revealing as their scale and precision. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu departed for Washington on Monday, just days after these strikes took place, for a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. It was Netanyahu's first visit to Washington since the joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran in late February that triggered the ongoing war. According to multiple reports, Netanyahu told his cabinet before departing that Iran would be first and foremost on the agenda. But the relationship between the two leaders is considerably more complicated than it appears on the surface. Netanyahu and Trump are reportedly at odds over several issues, including the recent U.S.-Saudi nuclear deal, the pending sale of advanced F-35 fighter jets to Turkey, and the extent of Israel's troop presence in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. What does that disagreement mean for this strategic picture? It suggests that Netanyahu felt he needed to create facts on the ground before his meeting with Trump, to demonstrate that Israel's military capability and regional reach are significant enough that any diplomatic resolution Trump might pursue with Iran would have to account for Israeli realities. The overnight multi-front strikes were not just military operations. They were negotiating leverage, a demonstration of capability designed to ensure that when Netanyahu sits across from Trump at the White House, he does so from a position of undeniable strength rather than diplomatic dependence. According to analysis from former Israeli military intelligence commanders, Netanyahu wants the United States to return to war with Iran. Israeli leaders view returning to war as preferable because any U.S. peace agreement with Iran will strengthen the regime in Tehran that they want to see toppled. The overnight strikes, by dramatically escalating the conflict across multiple fronts simultaneously, make it considerably more difficult for the United States to pursue a purely diplomatic resolution. Every destroyed IRGC aircraft, every dead intelligence chief, every eliminated Hezbollah commander is a barrier to peace, and that is precisely the point. Consider what this means for the broader region and for the civilians caught in the middle of this escalating conflict. Since Israel launched its attacks, Israeli bombing has killed at least 639 people and wounded 1,826, according to Iranian media. Iranian missiles have killed at least 25 people and wounded hundreds in Israel. In Lebanon, nearly 450 people have been killed in more than 7 months of cross-border violence, mostly militants, but also more than 80 civilians. 4,329 people have been killed and 12,233 injured in Lebanon overall, with at least 392 women and 253 children among the fatalities. Overnight, Israel unleashed a series of strikes on various parts of Dahieh, the predominantly Shia collection of suburbs on Beirut's southern edge where tens of thousands of residents live. The assault was part of a rapid escalation of Israeli strikes that has killed more than 700 people and wounded hundreds of others in Lebanon. This is the human dimension that often gets lost amid the raw numbers of aircraft destroyed, commanders killed, and military infrastructure targeted. Every single one of those casualties represents a family somewhere in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, or Israel, absorbing the news that a loved one is not coming home. The Israeli reservist from Haifa, who was killed during an Israel Defense Forces operation in southern Lebanon. The civilians killed in Israeli strikes on residential areas in Beirut's southern suburbs. The families forced to flee their homes as Israeli bombardments displaced over 20% of Lebanon's population. These are not abstract figures in a geopolitical analysis. They are real people, real families, real communities that are being destroyed by a conflict that shows no signs of slowing down. And yet, the strategic logic driving this escalation is not going to be swayed by humanitarian concern. The Israeli military previously said it had hit about 4,500 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and Syria over the past 5 months. Israel rarely comments on individual strikes, but has repeatedly said it will not allow Iran to expand its presence in Syria. That doctrinal commitment, combined with the operational capability demonstrated in these overnight strikes, suggests that Israel is prepared to sustain this multi-front campaign for as long as necessary to achieve its objectives. So, where does this leave things right now, as of the most recent information available? Israel has demonstrated that it can strike Iranian proxies and Iranian military assets across 4 different countries simultaneously in a single coordinated operation, without suffering significant losses in return. Iran's axis of resistance has been dealt a devastating blow, losing senior commanders in Syria, Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, Quds Force operatives in Iraq, and 16 aircraft in Tehran itself. The Israeli Prime Minister is heading to Washington to meet with a U.S. president who is weighing whether to expand his bombing campaign against Iran or pursue a diplomatic resolution concerning the Strait of Hormuz and the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. And the broader question, hanging over all of it, whether these overnight strikes represent the beginning of a sustained multi-front Israeli campaign designed to cripple Iran's proxy network permanently, or whether they're a one-off demonstration of capability designed to strengthen Netanyahu's negotiating position in Washington, remains something that no outside observer can answer with complete confidence right now. What is clear, based on everything currently available, is that the strategic landscape facing Tehran today looks fundamentally different and considerably more dangerous than the landscape that existed before these overnight strikes took place. A government that lost the overwhelming majority of its most senior military and intelligence leadership in a single devastating war back in February now finds itself unable to protect its own aircraft in its own capital, unable to protect its intelligence chiefs and its most important regional ally, unable to protect its most important proxy commanders in their own operational headquarters. The carefully constructed network of deterrence that Iran spent decades building, the axis of resistance that was supposed to make exactly this kind of coordinated Israeli operation too costly to attempt, has been exposed as fundamentally vulnerable to precisely the kind of multi-front strike that Israel just executed. If this story raised as many questions for you as it did for me while putting it together, drop a comment below and let me know what you think this overnight multi-front assault actually reveals about the balance of power in the region right now. Do you believe these strikes represent the beginning of a sustained Israeli campaign designed to permanently cripple Iran's proxy network? Or do you think they're a one-off demonstration designed to strengthen Netanyahu's negotiating position ahead of his meeting with Trump? Do you think Iran will retaliate directly against Israel, or will it continue to use its proxies to respond, knowing that direct confrontation carries risks it can't afford? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear your honest take on this one. And if you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand just how dramatically the strategic landscape has shifted in the Middle East over the past few days. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update the moment new developments come out of Jerusalem, Tehran, or Washington, because based on everything we just covered, this story is far from finished. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.